Hey, welcome to the People Power Lunch Hour. I'm your host, Vanessa Maria Graber. And on today's show, we'll be speaking with Cheri Honkala. She is the founder and director of the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign. She most recently was running for state representative for District 197 here in Philadelphia. And she and her family have just released a new film, Flesh and Blood, that will be airing in theaters in November, and it's currently being featured in the Philadelphia Film Festival. We are broadcasting live on Philly Cam TV and here in Center City from the WPPM 106.5 FM studios. The People Power Lunch Hour is a weekly show where we talk to members of the community, learn about issues that matter to them, and engage them in civic conversations. Stay tuned. We'll talk about all that and more on this edition of the People Power Lunch Hour. Hey, welcome back. I'm Vanessa Maria Graber, and again, I'm here joined by our special guest, Cheri Honkala. And if you don't know her, she has been a tireless voice and advocate for the poor community here in Philadelphia and everywhere. She's been very busy. She just released a film with her son, Mark Weber, who's the director and writer, called Flesh and Blood. It's being featured in the Philadelphia Film Festival and will be released in theaters this November. And big news has come out after her recent run in a special election in March for District 197's state representative seat here in Pennsylvania. And a lot has happened since we last spoke with Cheri, the DNC that was hosted here in Philadelphia. So we're going to spend the next hour kind of working our way back, starting with the news about the charges of fraud that were pressed on committee workers. And then we'll talk a little bit about the film. Then we'll talk a little bit about your history and your life and how that is portrayed in the film. Thank you so much for joining us, Cheri.
Oh, I'm so excited. This is probably the most important program for me to be speaking on, so I'm very happy to be here.
Well, we have collaborated with Cheri before in the Democratic National Convention. Last year, Philly Cam served as a hub for independent media. We hosted shows like Democracy Now! And many other independent journalists that came here. We featured a film that was about Cheri's movement. And we were out there on the streets with her, marching down Broad Street with folks like Immortal Technique, Rosa Clemente, Cornel West. And we were down there at Wells Fargo also covering the protests. So we're so happy to have you on.
Oh, this is great to be here today. There's always a lot going on in my life, but right now there's, it's like on steroids.
Yeah, so let's get to the news. I felt really great that the timing aligned, that big news broke, and that is that charges were filed in relation to a special election that was held here in Philadelphia on March 21st. A special election was held to fill the seat of Leslie Acosta, who had to resign due to fraud charges. And so Cheri ran on the ticket for the Green Party against Lucinda Little, who's a Republican. And there was no Democratic candidate due to a series of flubs on their behalf, but there was a write-in candidate, Emilio Vasquez, who wound up winning the seat. Tell us about the election first, and then how the fraud allegations were uncovered. And I want to give a shout out to Spirit News, who was doing a show here during that time, who was one of the first reporters to break the story. And tell us about the lawsuit and the charges that were filed.
Well, I went through a serious loss of innocence during the election because I saw all of these questionable things happening leading up to the actual campaign. And then on election day, I was devastated because I went, the very first thing that happened to me is that I went in to vote, and I myself had a difficult time voting because the machines weren't working in my voting booth. And, none of the folks that are on the city's payroll list that are supposed to be inside the voting booth place were there. They were other people that were there. So that's how I began the day. And then the second location that I went to, somebody handed me a copy of Emilio Vasquez's campaign literature, and I just thought, oh, it's standard literature, vote for me, Emilio Vasquez. But as soon as you turned it over, it said paid by the Emilio Vasquez, Friends of Emilio Vasquez. And when you turned it over, it was a picture of myself and the Republican candidate and Trump, basically implying that these folks are part of Trump's, the Trump world. And if anybody knows me, for the last 30 years here in Philadelphia, I have been a staunch advocate against Republican policies, but I've also been critical of the Democratic Party because as far as I'm concerned, they've gone too much to the middle and haven't really been strong advocates for many of the things that I believe in. So when I saw that, I just broke down because then I began to go to every voting booth and began to, watch them, sneaking people in, having 4 people in the booths, paying people in between the housing projects. And then to see in the paper over and over again, well, Cheri only got 400 votes. How can you tell how many votes I got if the whole thing was corrupt? And if you look at the votes, it's almost exact votes as Leslie Acosta when she won state rep. And there's, of course, I'm thankful to many of the Republicans that videotaped that day. They videotaped, one fraudulent thing after another, the exchanging of money, I have a photograph of my votes on election night at Emilio Vasquez's party. And somebody that was at the party that night sent me it because they were devastated. So while I'm very excited that the Attorney General's office has now indicted 4 people from the 43rd Ward, and I think it's 4 felonies. And as far as I'm concerned, that is in no way, shape, or form as devastating as what happened in many of the other wards. So I'm praying to God that they don't just use the 4 of those committee people or whoever they were that committed the intimidation or the fraud. I hope that they don't stop there. During this whole period, it's been devastating. I lost my house in the time being. They tried to sick the IRS on me, the Philadelphia Parking Authority, a lot of horrible things when you're connected. So I'm very thankful to all the people that have been holding me up and telling me not to be afraid and to remember people that fought and died for our right to vote. So they can try and belittle me in the paper, or they can try and take away all of my stuff. But I'm standing on our ancestors' shoulders, and I'm not going to stop this fight.
Yeah, I mean, there's evidence. Like I said, we were here in the newsroom before Spirit News was going to broadcast that, and I said, well, you need to show me what you have before you go on the air. And so they showed this documentation that they had, and they said, no, we witnessed this. This is happening. And so it's amazing how, instead of taking responsibility and really asking for an investigation that, they've been fighting, against it and not wanting, the investigation to move forward. And it speaks volumes because this is just one special election, right? We have lots of elections all over the city and all over the state. And you wonder, again, how much interference is really present.
That's why I'm very, I will never be the same. I will never look at elections the same anymore. And I really want to encourage folks to, have their eyes wide open during this upcoming DA race, because elections do get stolen and taken from right underneath your feet. And I think that we have to look at the connection between some of these other entities. I mean, all four came from Esperanza in that voting booth. And we have to really look at what are some of those relationships. Freddie Ramirez was connected to a clinic. These four, folks that have been indicted were connected to Esperanza. Renee Tartaglione, she was connected to the clinic, the Juniata Clinic. And so folks have to start asking a bigger question, like, are some of the pill mills and are some of the clinics, what other forms of organization does the machine use to steal votes?
Yeah, let's talk about the 197th district, right? Because this is a power struggle, right, for control over this district. And why is this district so important? What's happening in that part of North Philadelphia and Kensington?
Well, I think the whole country knows now. We've been fighting a opiate crisis for since the beginning of time that I can remember. And if people go see the film Flesh and Blood, they'll know I know about that fight very intimately. And I think that in a district that continues to be the poorest in the state of Pennsylvania, you can't really afford to have a state representative that won't look the other way. And so, that's why it continues to remain the poorest district in the state, because, we have, the number one source of income is welfare and the second is drugs. And we will continue to have that in our district until real jobs are created and until affordable housing is invested in the community. What's happening now is like major gentrification, the stealing of land. Many folks have been trying to keep up their community gardens and plots that they've been caring for forever. And so the whole fight around a community land trust, it'll be interesting to map out in the years to come. Was that community land trust really about preserving the community, or did it get turned into a land grab? And we're trying to make sure that that the community land trust stays available for the community.
This issue of evictions and foreclosures, it's directly related to gentrification. Can you talk more about your work in preventing people from losing their homes, and your run for sheriff, which was based on a platform of no evictions or foreclosures?
Yeah. The Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign, we've been fighting forever for some very basic things, and now under the Trump world, we're really in trouble. Just thousands of folks are going to lose their Section 8 certificates. and their access to public housing. And so we've, about a month ago, we launched a campaign and have been going around and knocking on the doors of everybody that we know that lives in public housing, letting them know, like, yes, your providers are not letting you know this, but you soon might not have housing. And so we've been meeting with residents of public housing, and we've been masterminding a plan on what we intend to do. We have a group of folks that have come together, and we're going to begin to buy these abandoned properties and ask for work brigades, and we're going to start rehabbing these properties and funding them independent of the city and the government, and begin to start housing people here in Philadelphia. But while we're doing that, we are not going to stop not holding those accountable for providing the basic necessities of life. We're really concerned with the nonprofit industrial complex that gets millions and millions of dollars. And their major concern is, like, how do we keep our few staff people working here? And then every day we walk through Philadelphia and the numbers of homeless are just, like, visibly growing on the streets. So we really need people to help us in these projects. If there's any licensed contractors that are out there, people that just want to help us either with our food distribution. The holidays are coming up. Those are always the worst time of year. I was supposed to be, the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign. We had a Halloween party last night. It was kind of scary because I spent the night talking to people about their housing crisis. So, we have a modern day underground railroad where we will take anybody in at any time that is denied access to shelter in Philadelphia. So we need more blankets. We need food for the holidays. We need more mattresses. We're getting ready to, put up some tents in some different locations because we're just full to capacity. And so we really need whatever people can, whatever resources that are extra. Please, go to our website at economichumanrights.org and, send us an email, and we'll come pick up whatever stuff that you have if you can't drop it off.
It sounds like not just here in Philadelphia, but you're seeing similar things happen in Puerto Rico right now, where it's people, neighbors, community members having to support their own communities because the lack of resources is pretty evident. And as you mentioned, there are real questions about how money is being used to supposedly help the people that are in need. And what we're seeing now is that weeks have gone by and there's still people living without food and water. Yet that's been happening in Philadelphia for a very long time.
Absolutely. And so we're also not going to forget our Puerto Rican brothers and sisters. My son's grandparents have been very impacted by Hurricane Maria, but now there's a different hurricane, and that's with the politicians playing with their lives. My son's grandparents live in Arecibo. They lost everything. They had a dental clinic there. They no longer have it. They have a house that had 12 feet of water. And the last thing that Guillermo's grandmother said to me is, Cheri, we'll be back in communication as soon as we have water and as soon as we have electricity. They have yet to be in communication. So it means they still do not have water and they still do not have electricity. So one of the things, there's some wonderful people that have put together a bunch of stuff, sent it on a ship, and somewhere during the end of November, I will fly to Puerto Rico with some other folks, and we will begin to distribute those resources and do the thing that we know how to do, which is to help people try and make something out of nothing. And we are also organizing resources in particular for some of the unemployed Puerto Ricans in Kissimmee, Florida, that have a lot of construction skills so that they can fly back home to Puerto Rico because they were displaced and begin to have some money in their pocket and also be able to fight to rebuild on the land. But yes, everything that's happening there is really about gentrification on steroids and the stealing of land and the killing of a people and a culture. And that's why myself and retired City Council member Angel Ortiz and Edgardo Gonzalez and a bunch of other folks, we traveled to Washington, D.C. To go to the Organization of American States and ask for international human rights observers because we know the real story that's unfolding, as Rosa Clemente is reporting, is not being told. And so we need eyes from around the world witnessing what's happening there. These are human rights violations that could be prevented. I don't understand why the National Guard, from the very beginning, didn't start with water drops across the entire island. And so these are preventable human rights violations, and we need to not forget what's happening there.
And the reality is that even before the storm hit, over 400,000 Puerto Ricans left the island because they didn't have affordable housing because of the high unemployment rate. And even as we saw recently in a series of articles done by the Inquirer, they were being sent to rehab centers here, because there were not resources or people didn't want to deal with the problem. So even before the hurricane, people were coming to North Philadelphia and Camden, which both have very high rates of population for Puerto Ricans. And they're coming here in search of work and housing and relief, and yet they're still not finding it. And so there's a real conundrum now, right? They can't be on the island. There's not a lot of relief here. But I do think people are really starting to see the level of colonization of Puerto Rico, and how there's a real lack of resources here in Philadelphia. And again, with the gentrification, there's already big corporations coming down there to survey the land and the damage, looking to set up shop there. So as you said, it's important to be aware.
Boy, I could really go on and on about this forever. Yes. It's really important to the listeners, no matter how beautiful the rhetoric of any politician, you have to investigate how they got there, what money they got, and who they got it from. Some of the biggest speakers against gentrification and the taking of land receive some of the biggest money from developers. And so it's really important that people do their own investigation on where people get their money.
So if you're just tuning in, you're watching and listening to the People Power Lunch Hour. I'm Vanessa Maria Graber, and I'm here with Cheri Honkala, who is a fierce and longtime organizer, activist here from Philadelphia via Minnesota. And she is the founder and director of the Poor People Economic Human Rights Campaign. She recently ran for state representative in the 197th district. And she is also released a film with her son called Flesh and Blood, which I'd like to talk a little bit about because the film really encompasses all these things, right? Access to housing, unemployment, reentry, addiction, and families, right? And how families connect with one another.
It's raw and real.
Yeah, I was captivated by the film, and I was captivated because it's so Philly.
It's
And
so Philly.
well, we actually have a show here called Philly on Location that looks at all films and TV shows that are supposed to be filmed here or about Philly, and they kind of do a test on does it accurately portray neighborhoods and people, and how Philly is it really? Some meet the test and others don't. But in watching Flesh and Blood, it does give, I feel, a real accurate glimpse at what the life of many people is like, especially since we've had many people who have been recently released from prison who, talk about their struggles and finding work and reconnecting with their families and navigating all of the temptation that's out there so they don't fall back into that. Talk to us about your son, Mark. I'm sure you're very proud, who is an actor, a writer, and now director. And how did the idea for the film come about? And what did he tell you when he said, Mom, I want to make a film kind of about our life?
Well, yes, I'm very proud of Mark. He, he could be making films about La La Land if he wanted to. He's become incredibly successful. He's married to actress Teresa Palmer. And, they could just go and forget. But my son has come up with this new kind of way of doing films, which is half fiction and half real. One would kind of argue is how much of the half is not real. But, people should come out and see the film. It's actually showing Friday and Saturday here at the Prince Theater. And then later there's going to be a community screening. But please come out and watch the film this Friday and Saturday at the Prince. Mark will be there. We're going to have a Q&A afterwards, and so will my son Guillermo. But my son basically said, Mom, I'm coming to do a film so that I can lift up what's happening with, because my son knows that every day in the neighborhood, the largest group of people that we're having to deal with that are living on less than $1 a day for not every day, but sometimes 2 weeks. So, whether it's passing out, free food or donuts or potatoes or whatever we can get at any given moment, there's a ton of unemployed men that have returned from prison that are desperately looking for jobs anywhere and everywhere. And by the way, if there's any listeners out there today or anybody watching this, if anybody knows any kind of job, even if it's for a day, please call me at 215-869-4753. That's 215-869-4753. I know hundreds and hundreds of men that are desperate, even if it's just for a couple hours of work to put money in their pockets. So it's my son understanding that reality, that many of the men that are actually in the film, not my son, are men that are out here, that missed many years of being able to raise their children, who right now are trying to figure out, how do I eat today? Cheri or they're asking other folks in the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign, is there any, can I paint? Can I clean somebody's basement? Can I do whatever? Just so that they can eat today. And so that's how we got the idea to do it. Now, I live a very complicated life. And so every day that he was shooting the film, I had to try to figure out how to adjust my already full-time life into shooting every day. And so did his younger brother, Guillermo. But he would show me pieces of the script every day because he knows if he showed me the whole script, the film wouldn't have been done in the artistic way that he does it as an artist, you know.
You want it to be like more organic.
Yes, yes. And I would have been, like anybody else, wanting to, hide all my, personal flaws, because I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect. I try to be the best possible mother and human being that I can be. But I'm still on a journey to being the most amazing person that I can be. And so are my children. And that is seen very clearly in the film Flesh and Blood.
So, if you haven't heard about the film, I'm happy to tell you a little about it because I was really into it. It's about a guy, Mark, who has served 5 years in prison for unknown crime, and he comes back, and that's how the film opens. You greet him at the prison, and we're not sure about the time frame, but it seems a kind of a short time frame of when he's just getting his bearings, getting reintroduced to the world, and all the emotions that he feels along with that. Being nervous, being scared, being excited, feeling sad and regretful, and then all of the people he encounters along the way. But the main focus is living with you and his younger brother Guillermo. And Guillermo is such a rising star too. And one of my questions is, was he really working on a documentary? Because the scenes with him filming were really, really great.
I know that that's one of his longer term goals. My son Guillermo was, at the time of the film, diagnosed with Asperger's, and he was also diagnosed with narcolepsy. So he's a teenage boy who was going to a Philadelphia school, and then having to figure out how to deal with two different disabilities and all of these things happening for real in his life and in his community.
Yeah, and part of the documentary is about his experience and the impact of bullying and what that actually does to somebody and many others. And it seemed to me, in his own way, that's his form of advocacy, right? To share his experience and hope that others would see that their actions have an impact.
Yes, it would be my dream someday to have him, to have a larger venue to share parts of that film with other kids that are struggling with similar disabilities. When Guillermo was diagnosed during the filming of Flesh and Blood, the school he was attending basically, told him that, smart kids don't have disabilities. And so we ended up having to sue the Philadelphia school district and won. But then they required a second diagnosis. So my son had to go through a second entire diagnostic process. And of course, they said, yes, you really do have Asperger's. But I just feel for all the parents out there that have kids that are autistic. And for Guillermo, some of the things that people have been asking him for years, along with many other autistic kids, is they've been asking them to, put a square peg into a round hole. And no matter how many times you try to do it, it's just not going to work. And so I've had to live my whole life with people saying, oh, just give me a couple hours with Guillermo. Give me a weekend with him and, I'll, straighten him out, whatever that means. And, people are slowly beginning to learn more about autism and the struggles that autistic kids have to deal with.
And the need for resources for parents who are having, to deal with that. Because again, there are many children throughout the region that are experiencing this and may go undiagnosed and untreated because of the lack of access to health care and educational resources for parents.
So I remember learning about autism and going through entire classes at the Child Guidance Center. And now I will never look at a mother again that has a kid that's like, flipping out next to her like she doesn't know how to control her kid. Because the truth is I don't know if her child has a disability or not. And so it's taught me to have a different lens on the way I look at different things in life now.
And to also not underestimate them because, the talent that he showed, that scene where he's talking about Play-Doh, again, that's one of the scenes that's very heartwarming. And, from Mark's perspective, it looked like this is why I'm so glad to be home, for moments like these that I can share with my brother. And that, in a way, he's guiding him throughout the film as well.
Oh, yes. I mean, Guillermo is a genius. I'm absolutely convinced that we'll be watching films of his someday in theaters. And, he's even spoke to me about being interested in running a program at Philly Cam, specifically just for autistic kids. But he is an absolute delight. We just got back from Los Angeles, and Guillermo and Rosario Dawson just really, hit it off together, and were very. She was very moved by Guillermo's presence, not just in the film, but after the film, and how he's really blossoming and answering a whole lot of questions about what it means to be a teen in this very difficult time in history. And he's just amazing.
Yeah, and Rosario Dawson, she was a child actor as well who was just discovered sitting on her front steps in New York in her first movie, Kids, which, is a bit similar in some ways because that film for me, when I watched it, I was as a teen or young person, it really did capture lost innocence of children, right? Being exposed to drugs and alcohol and sex. So I could see a lot of the parallels there between the artists.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, the film is really great. Again, you'll recognize, I live in Port Richmond, close to Kensington, so I recognize a lot of the scenes and the streets and the L. And so it does pass that realness test for how Philly it is. And again, that one scene, I think you're the one that you're referring to earlier, was there's a support group, and so were those men real men from the community going through reentry?
Yes, all of them in the support group are currently struggling with questions of addiction as well as finding any housing in Philly. I haven't been able to find housing for people in Philly for like the last 5 years without a massive fight and using our own underground railroad. Other than that, every single day in this city, people go into the Office of Emergency Services and are turned away every single solitary day. And I'm working with a young woman right now who she's been on the waiting list for about like 15 years for affordable housing now in Philadelphia. She's totally at the end of her rope now and living in, basically like a one room with her 3 kids. That situation, we're going to have to really begin to do some serious advocacy around. Because she's definitely headed towards homelessness, I'd say, like in the next 2 weeks. The property she lives in, they've recently ruled that as that it needs to be condemned. And so we're going to do something, because as far as I'm concerned, her living out on the streets with her 3 kids is not an option.
What's your relationship or message to our legislators, when so many people here in Philly and in Camden, you know, they can't find housing?
Well, I think that we have to, like Dr. King said, we have to act like an ambulance and go through the red light. We can't no longer afford to just sit around and wait for our elected officials to do something. And, you know, I don't believe it, because there's tons of empty churches all through Philadelphia. There's no reason that anybody can convince me that on any given night that it's okay to have women and children outside on the streets. And I'm an emergency license foster care provider. So I know, the children that are separated only because they didn't have access to affordable housing. I know the kids that are taken away from their moms only because the city didn't figure out how to have water on in their house or a certain amount of food. And I think that we need to begin to ask the question, how many kids are fast-tracked into adoption only because they don't have access to affordable housing in Philadelphia? So we have to begin to step forward, help build this movement, and begin to insist that our elected officials, okay, maybe you can't pass the legislation overnight to build X amount of houses or whatever, but we want you to now use your social capital. Senator Roxanne Jones, when she was in Harrisburg, she opened up her office, and I brought homeless kids into the office. They slept in the rotunda, whatever. People need to pick up their phones and call around to the churches that are in their districts, do whatever they possibly can. But we need to institute a zero tolerance on homelessness. And what they've done, the politicians have done in reverse. And in particular, what happened to me and a group of homeless families in the 197th district is we were told explicitly that those families want to be homeless. That's why they're homeless. That's an interesting public relations spin, but it's in no way the truth at all.
No, in fact, many people have lost their homes because of bad bank loans, fraudulent bank loans and mortgages. People who have been laid off, people whose, Social Security or SSI checks have been canceled or even stolen from them. There's so many stories, there's not just one reason.
Yeah, before you can, knock off a population of people, first you have to dehumanize them. And that's what's happened with the homeless, and in particular single moms here in the Philadelphia area. First they tell you that you're living high off the hog on welfare, that you don't want employment, that you don't really have any work ethics. Some of the most giving people are the poorest. We receive the most donations, the most human labor, the most volunteers from folks that are poor. And they're the biggest givers. They're the ones that'll, we have an emergency situation, and they'll be the ones coming up with, the $20 or $30 or whatever is needed. And there's no excuse for homelessness. I don't buy this whole issue of scarcity. I believe that there's an abundance, and we've got a serious issue with sharing. And there is a moral urgency. And there's something wrong with me having all these different churches on speed dial on my phone. And, they, cry the same, like we have insurance issues. Okay, so then what are we going to do? Everybody pile into my house? It's absolutely crazy. Again, we need to begin to understand that these are human beings, and nobody wants to live the inhumane life of living moment to moment, wondering if you're going to be homeless for the holidays or not. Nobody wants to be like that.
It's true. So if the people who are listening or watching, you can help, right?
That's right. You can go to economichumanrights.org, sign up to volunteer. We'll put you to work. You'll feel good about yourself. Get rid of the extra crap in your house that you don't need. Come volunteer for a couple hours, whatever, and get your kids involved too. My kids, both Guillermo and Mark, I taught them, let's not get invested in all this material stuff. It could be here one day, gone tomorrow. But what we do have is we have each other. And the most important thing to invest in is your neighbors, people you love, your family. And let's start sharing. And I always joke my mom named me Cher because I'm supposed to share.
That's a good message. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to the People Powered Lunch Hour here at Philly Cam on our TV channel and on the radio, WPPM. And I'm Vanessa Maria Gruber, your host. I've been talking with Cheri Honkala, who is a longtime advocate and organizer of the Poor People Economic Human Rights Campaign here in Philadelphia. And she most recently released a film with her son, Mark Weber, called Flesh and Blood, which is going to be showing in theaters this weekend. And she is also ran for state representative of the 197th district, where she's involved in a lawsuit, and now federal state charges have been filed by the Attorney General against 4 workers for election fraud activities. So we've covered mostly all of that. I do want to work my way back to a couple historic events while I have you here. You ran for vice president in 2012 with Jill Stein, of course, with the Green Party. Tell us how you got to be vice president. It's another scene from the movie where you tell your son, oh, by the way, I'm running for vice president. And I think he says, like, of the country.
Yes. When I first received a phone call from Dr. Jill Stein, she called me up and told me, Cheri, you're on a short list to potentially be my running mate for vice president. Please don't tell anybody because I haven't made my decision. I hung up the phone. I told everybody I know because I was absolutely sure once she vetted me, I would never be chosen. So, for like those few minutes, I had like this huge ego. Wow, somebody wants me to be their vice president. And then I got the shock of my life. She called me up and said, Cheri, I want you to be my running mate. And these are the reasons. And then I found out running for one of this country's highest offices is similar to having a semi-truck run you over and then back up and run over you again. So just meaning, when you run for any political office, especially the highest political office, there's some really ugly people out there that are willing to do whatever ugly things they can to you and your family and the people that you love that are around you. So you just got to develop a really strong mental muscle and stay grounded, stay humble. And what I'm finding is incredibly important is you have to stay honest. Something I haven't seen a whole lot of in the 197 for a very long time. And, always about politicians and ugliness and that kind of stuff, but you really learn firsthand. And one of the things, I would belong to any political party that doesn't receive money from the bad guys. And that's why I'm a member of the Green Party, is because they refuse to take any money from corporations. And I've watched some of our most progressive politicians begin to become somebody that they're not. Only because they start with a little bit of money from the bad guy, then they need a little bit more money from the bad guy, and then they no longer can live out or support the policies that they really care about. And so If the Green Party was the purple, pink, orange party, whatever, I would belong to that. But right now in this country, there's only one political party that doesn't take money from corporations, and that's the Green Party. And so we need to catch up with the rest of the world. The rest of the world has 10, 15, Finland has 15 political parties. And maybe someday we're going to get beyond 2 corporate-controlled political parties in this country and really be free to support politicians that are about creating a different kind of world. We're running out of time because our very planet is at stake. We have this horrible mess now with the Trump administration. And so we got to get busy at taking back our country. And I have faith in young people. I see it in my youngest son. They're not going to let this stuff go. They're going to do something.
We definitely have heard from a lot of youth here at Philly Cam who give us hope, and their optimism and genius is definitely what gives me hope and inspiration. Related to what you were talking about the need for more political parties, one of the biggest criticisms a lot of people have who are interested in third parties is the fact that they're not allowed to debate. You were arrested at Hofstra University with Dr. Jill Stein for trying to enter the debate and be a part of the dialogue. You were denied entry, you were arrested and taken away. Tell us about that experience.
Yes. One thing is, regardless of how anybody feels about Dr. Jill Stein, people really need to examine when there's a strong woman that's out there who becomes the villain. There's a backstory, and people should always examine that. And I think in the years to come, we're going to find out that it's amazing that she remains standing. And I'm hoping someday that she'll tell that whole story of the threats to her life, the amazing stuff that she's had to deal with. And by the way, she'll be in Philadelphia Friday and Saturday for the Q&A after the film as well. But Jill and I decided, oh my God, 85% of the country can vote for us. We're on ballots across the entire country. We did all of our homework. In Pennsylvania, we collected 60,000 signatures just to get on the ballot, when the Democrats only had to get 2,000 and the Republicans only had to get 2,000. We had to get 60,000. Okay, we did our homework in every single city and state across the entire country. And what do you mean we can't get into the debates? And then we found out how the debate system is set up in this country, that it's 10 corporations that make a decision who gets to be a part of the political debates about who becomes our president and our vice president. And so we just thought, no, 10 corporations are not going to make a decision that just these guys that are running for office, but us women who don't take money from corporations should be allowed to be a part of the presidential debates, especially if we qualify. And so we went on to the public university campus and we started to walk across the campus. The next thing we knew, we were grabbed by Secret Service, and luckily Democracy Now! Was there filming, or nobody would have believed it. And we were grabbed by Secret Service, and we were handcuffed, photographed, and taken into this scary little Winnebago in the middle of the campus. And then we were put into a paddy wagon and taken about 10 miles away to a warehouse. And we got out of the warehouse. And, of course, we're terrified because we were met by all those Secret Service guys with the little things out their ears.
The Men in Black.
The Men in Black. And there was 30 of them. And Jill and I. And they had metal chairs in the middle of the warehouse, and handcuffed myself and Jill to the metal chairs. And we, for 9 hours, over 9 hours, nobody in my family, nobody in the campaign, or nobody in the country knew where the legal two presidential and vice presidential candidates of our country were. So, needless to say, for my family and for the campaign, it was terrifying because we had just disappeared. We disappeared for 9 hours in our country when we were on the ballot box across the entire country. And so they purposely kept us in there for the entire time during the presidential debates so that we could not be seen or heard of.
That's incredible. Well, you survived, and you're still here, and you're still telling your story. And I'm so glad that you came here to visit, and we hope you'll continue to come back and keep us updated. We've been speaking with Cheri Honkala. She is the director and founder of the Poor People Economic Human Rights Campaign. She's run for sheriff here in Philadelphia. She was the Green Party vice presidential candidate. And most recently, she ran in the special election for state representative and District 197. Can you tell our listeners and viewers one more time how to get in touch with you, if they have jobs for people who are in reentry, if you have donations, if you want to volunteer, you want to get involved in this movement, where can they go?
Yes, you can go to economichumanrights.org. Again, that's economichumanrights.org. Or you can also call us at 215-869-4753. That's 215-869-4753. And I just really want to thank you for this program. It's probably one of the most important programs I've ever been on.
That's right. You've been listening to the People-Powered Lunch Hour. We want to thank all of our staff and our crew and Cheri for coming on the show to speak with us. We're here every Wednesday from 12 to 1 p.m. If you have a story, a local issue, if you're part of a social movement, nonprofit organization, or you're simply a citizen here who would like to talk about these important issues, please visit our website at phillycam.org, where you can check out this episode and all of our episodes. All right, I'm Vanessa Maria Graber. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week.